This happened about 6 months ago. I was 22 at the time, and my daughter was only 4. I lived in a 2-story house with just me, my daughter, and my husband. I was taking at-home classes to be an iPhone specialist, starting at 5 p.m. and ending at 10 p.m. Monday through Friday. My husband had just left for his 2 weeks of training he does every year for the military, so it's just me and my daughter and our pit bull mix, Mavis. I had just finished my class for the week and had the weekend free, so I decided to go to my mother's house until Sunday. So I packed up all my stuff and my daughter's stuff, and we went for the weekend. We returned home Sunday to find that someone had broken into our home. There were muddy footprints everywhere and windows open, but nothing was missing. That struck me as odd, because I have iPads, laptops, etc. just laying about in my room, so I made sure all the windows and doors were locked. Nothing happened that night, but the next day my mother came over to pick up my daughter so I could do my classes without worrying what she was into. They left, and I went to watch my class upstairs. I put my headphones on so I could hear my teacher instruct the class, but swore I kept hearing stuff downstairs. I even texted my mom and told her that I was hearing stuff downstairs, and it was creeping me out. But she assured me it was probably just Mavis because everything was locked up tight and no one could get in. I agreed, thinking I was probably just freaking myself out. I continued listening to my instructor teach, and I swear I heard footsteps on the stairs, so I hurry up and take my headset off and listen. I don't hear anything. I walked down the stairs and didn't see anything either, so I went back to class. At 10 p.m. my class was over, and my mom decided to just keep my daughter for the night. I was doing homework with Mavis upstairs with me, and all of a sudden she started barking and growling and ran downstairs. Now, Mavis usually barks and growls at the slightest noise outside, so I didn't think much of it, but I decided to check it out anyway because of what happened while I was at my mother's. Again, nothing was out of the ordinary, so I went back upstairs. I was finally done with homework, and it was about midnight, so I went downstairs and called my mom like I do every night. We were talking, and I decided to open my daughter's door and peek my head in. I don't know why I did this, because my daughter was at my mom's for the night, but habit, I guess. I should have mentioned earlier that when you look into my daughter's room, her bed is on the far wall, a good ways away from the door, so you can clearly see under the bed. So I opened the door, and to my horror, a man was under the bed. I just froze and didn't move, just stood there in shock. After what felt like minutes, I slowly shut the door and whispered into the phone to my mom that there was a man in my house under my daughter's bed. My mom was terrified and was already in the car on her way. She already had my brother call the police, and she screamed at me to get outside. So I ran outside with Mavis and waited for the police to arrive. About 3 minutes later, they come and search my house and found no one. But they discovered my bathroom window was open, and they happened to shine their light into the living room window, and I could clearly see 2 huge handprints where they slid the window down. The cops waited for my mom and brother to get there, and while we were waiting, they told me about this man that usually stays 2 houses down from mine with his parents. Both of his parents had a pretty bad drug habit, and this guy has been known to put women in the hospital and try to kill them. What scares me even more is since we have bought this house, my daughter has been terrified and always told my mom she wanted to stay with her because it wasn't safe at mommy's house. I didn't think too much of it because I thought maybe it was just a new place, and you know how kids are with new places. After this whole thing happened, I stayed with my mom until my husband came home. We decided to ask our daughter about the house, and what she told me absolutely terrified me. She said that at night while her dad and I slept, monsters come to her window and try to get in, and she says it's a boy monster and a girl. The next day we installed alarms on all the windows and security lights. I can't stop questioning why. Why was this man under my daughter's bed? Was he waiting for me to go to sleep? Was he waiting for my mom to bring my daughter back home and I put her to bed? I get sick to my stomach thinking what could have happened. March of 2003, when I was 17, my younger brother and I took a weekend camping trip up to the Los Padres National Forest. We'd gone there many times with our families for day camping, swimming, and just lounging around. This time, though, we went alone for a 2-night camping trip at our favorite spot that locals simply called the Gorge. We will never forget this weekend, for all the wrong reasons. We got there Saturday morning at around 9 a.m. and hiked the 5 miles out to the Gorge. The Gorge is a large swimming hole with a huge 60-foot rock cliff boulder that visitors love to jump off into the deep waters below. The jumping rock cliff is very steep, and one must jump in a specific location below to ensure that they did not hit rocks protruding from the wall's face. The Gorge has many primitive camping areas, and is overall a beautiful yet isolated place. The first day was very fun, and after a long day of swimming, catching crawdads, jumping from the rocks, and just relaxing, we set up our tents, made a fire, and ate our cans of SpaghettiOs and the few crawdads we had cooked for dinner. Towards the end of dinner, we were visited by a large group of students who were camping further down the river. They stated they were students from the Bay Area who had a few nights left in their almost 2-week-long school camping trip. We offered them some of our chips and snacks and chatted with them a bit before they made their hike back to their camping spot. It soon got dark, and my brother and I got ready for bed. My brother was 2 years younger than I and had a deep fear of isolation, so we slept in the same tent and agreed that we would keep our fire burning the entire night to ease his anxiety. We put 5 logs on the fire and crept inside our tent and got in our sleeping bags. We both fell asleep very fast as we were exhausted from the day. Around 2:30 in the morning, we were both awoken by a large splash of water near our tent that put out the fire. We heard no voices and could not see much from inside our tent. We froze in terror. My brother began to cry, and I tried to calm him down. I told him that I would go outside to investigate and that everything would be okay. I told him that our water bladder must have fell from the tree that we had hung it, and I'm sure it was some kind of coincidence. I grabbed my flashlight, unzipped our tent, and stepped outside. I pointed the flashlight over the fire pit and saw 4 large men sitting around our fireplace, all staring at me with what I can only describe as expressionless faces. It appeared as though they had split our 2-gallon water bladder that had been hanging over a tree and had thrown it into our fire. I was in shock and didn't know what to say. For about 5 seconds, none of them said anything. We just stared at each other. Then one of them said in a very drunk voice, "Get your pussy friend out here." I then heard my brother hyperventilating and screaming and crying in our tent in a way that made me feel so helpless. I had no weapons, and my brother and I were outnumbered 2-1. I asked the men what they wanted and told them that they could just have that and we could just leave, and that we were sorry if we had taken their camping spot or invaded their area. They ignored my question and just stood up. This is when I saw that 2 of the 4 men were holding something in their hands. Long sword-shaped in appearance, like a machete or a small sword, but they looked homemade and very primitive. The men yelled at us to get up and bring our pussy asses with them. I thought for a second that these might be drunk rangers getting mad at us for having too big a fire, but once I glanced at their clothing and saw their baggy jean pants and their black-gray hoodie-type clothing, I knew that we were not that lucky. I had heard in the past that drug dealers and/or Mexican cartel had been caught hiding large amounts of marijuana plants in the forest, and wondered if these men were some of the men who somehow felt that we were a threat to their crops. I was in fear for our lives. The men did not touch us directly or threaten us with violence, but I definitely felt an implied threat in their tone and believed that we really had no choice in the matter. My brother, who was still crying, and I followed the lead male while the other 3 men fell back behind us. My brother put his hand on my shoulder and was visibly shaken. He then whispered to me that they were walking in the direction of the over 60-foot rock cliff and that we needed to run. I was petrified and not paying any attention to where they were leading us, but realized that he was right. I stopped dead in my tracks and said to the men, "What are you going to do with us?" The lead male started in a slurred voice, "Nothing. We're just going to have some fun with you pussies." I felt that we really had no choice but to do what they said, and hoped that they were merely screwing with us and that this would all be over soon. After about 30 seconds of walking, we arrived at the jumping spot on top of the bounder, overlooking the gorge swimming area. One of the men then stated, "Have you guys ever jumped from here?" I told them that yes, I had, but my brother had not because it was a pretty high jump and was very dangerous for most people due to the height and the rocks below. The men laughed again and called my brother a pussy. I told them that we were not pussies, as I had jumped from this spot before, but that it was not safe to do so in the dark. The men then formed a half circle around us, and one of the men said, "I want to see. Show us that you're not a bunch of pussies." I screamed at them that it was too dangerous at night and that during the day was dangerous enough. I told them that there are many rocks that you have to avoid, and that if you did not jump correctly, that the jump could kill you. I pleaded and pleaded. The men just laughed and took a few steps closer to us. I was beyond scared and could hear my heart beating through my ears. My brother, by this point, was crying loudly and saying things I could not understand. He was beyond terrified, and so was I. I grabbed his hand and told him that we needed to get away from these men, as we were in great danger. I told him that I had jumped off the bounder into the water before and knew where to jump, and that if he jumped with me, we would be okay. I told him that I would use my flashlight to help guide us, and that I would tell him where to put his feet and how far to jump. The men laughed at us as we had our conversation, and showed zero humanity or pity. I held my brother's hand, and placed his feet with my hand in a specific location on the rock ledge, where I remembered jumping from the last time I was there months before. I explained to him that I knew he was scared, and so was I, but we needed to jump out as far as we could, and slightly to the right, otherwise we would hit the rocks. He was shaking, crying, and kept telling me that he couldn't do it. He then urinated on himself. The men laughed and laughed, and kept saying they couldn't believe how big of pussies we were. I then told my brother that we needed to jump now, and that we would be okay if he listened to me. I told him that after we jumped, we could swim to the shore on the right, and would hide in the bushes until daybreak, and go for help then. I then grabbed his hand tightly, and told him that when we hit the water, he needed to tuck his legs and arms in so that they would not get hurt from the impact of the water, and instructed him that he needed to swim hard to the surface, as we would sink pretty far down due to the height of where we were jumping. And we jumped. I pulled him hard with me to ensure that we were safe from the rocks below, and that he jumped far enough out. We fell for what seemed like a minute, but was only a few seconds in reality. My brother yelled all the way down in a way that I had never heard from another human being before. Terror, dread, and fear of imminent death reverberated from his voice. I felt helpless and almost forgot where we were for a few seconds. Then we hit the water. As soon as we hit, I lost my grip of my brother's hand, but I did hear a second impact in the water. I swam up towards the surface with all of my energy and took a deep breath. I then listened for my brother to surface and heard nothing. I panicked and dove down into the water to try to grab him. Just as I dove, I felt his leg brush against my hand, and I realized that he was about to surface. I swam up again and heard my brother. He was crying and kept saying that his arm hit a rock and that he could not feel it. The men above were laughing again, and I could hear one of them say, "They fucking made it, those pussies." I then heard objects splashing in the water around us and realized that they were throwing beer bottles or rocks or some other hard objects at us. I quickly grabbed my brother by his shirt and helped him swim to the nearby shore from my memory of where it was. The whole time we swam, many objects landed dangerously close to us, and I felt that if any had hit us, it would have caused death or great bodily harm to us, especially if we were hit in the head. My flashlight had been lost in the fall, and we were in complete darkness. We reached the water's edge, and I pulled my brother to the shore. Objects continued to rain down around us, and we could hear the men yelling and laughing. I told my brother that we needed to run. He was crying and was holding his injured arm that he still could not move or use. It had a deep cut around the elbow, and even with just the starlight, we could see that it was a serious injury. We stumbled down the tree line and began making our way through the darkness to one of the main trails whose location I remembered from past memory. We fell again and again, and were cut by branches and rocks all over our bodies as we wandered down the overgrown trails. Everything in my body told me to keep going and to get as far away from these men as we could. We walked for many minutes until we could no longer hear the men, and then we waited. I wrapped my brother's arm with my shirt and told him that it was over and that all we had to do was wait until morning for help. We sat in that spot all night, and my brother cried and shook for hours. I just put my arm around him and patted his head, as I did when we were children whenever he had a panic attack and our parents were not around. At daybreak, we could finally see the severity of his injuries. He had a deep gash in his arm, and his shoulder was obviously dislocated. I helped him hike up the nearby trail, and we walked all the way back to the base camp ranger station. We explained what happened to the rangers, and they sent 2 armed officers to go out and investigate the location. My brother was sent to a nearby hospital for treatment, and I joined him on the ambulance ride over. The rangers/police never found the men, but did retrieve most of our gear. The scary thing about this incident is that same week 2 teenage boys were found dead at the bottom of the gorge jumping area, and their group had encountered a group of people, just as we did, at their camping location, with similar machete objects who chased them off their camping spot. I'm glad to be alive, and my brother and I have never gone camping again alone, and have never been back to that location. All we have left from the incident are the scars on my brother's arms, hospital bills, and a lot of trauma. An article of the death of the 2 teenage boys is in the description. I can only hope that their deaths were accidents as the authorities ruled. I didn't find out about their deaths until 7 years after, but was horrified about the similar circumstances and timing of the 2 events. If you enjoyed this video, you know what to do. If you would like a chance to have your story featured in an upcoming video, make sure you email it to urmaker6260@gmail.com. I appreciate everyone giving this video a listen, and I hope you enjoyed this set of stories. I also wanted to give a big thank you to my thumbnail artist, Deanna. She also just started a new website, which is linked in the description, so make sure you go check it out and show her some support. I also want to give a big thank you to everyone who's been wishing me a happy birthday for the past few days. I wasn't able to reply individually to everyone, but I do want to let you know that I do appreciate it, and it was a lot of fun in the live stream getting to chill with you guys, and show you some of my very old cringeworthy videos. I'll catch you guys in the next video, and just remember, it's always scarier if it's true.